come. Well, Cavs headlines. We make the first one, I think, something that everybody's questioning. I don't think there's a reason to be alarmed. Donovan Mitchell's ankle. It's something that everybody's asking me about. And I'm sure you've written and been asked about the Spider's ankle. He rested. It'll be 2 weeks since he last played when we hit the court on Sunday against either Atlanta or Miami. What's your take? What do you know? What can you tell us about Spider's ankle?
Well, clearly he's been, I don't know, Raf, you were out of town, but he's been warming up before games, been doing his workouts before games, been at practice. Had these been playoff games, he would have been playing. So there's really no issue. I don't even think there's any, after a day or two, there was any kind of soreness or anything. Yeah. So he's good to go. They were just, at that point of the year, you've already clinched a number 1 seed. Let's be extra cautious.
I think it's a luxury you have by having the season the Cavs have.
Yes.
And I think all the other guys were healthy enough. By the way, anybody that is in an NBA roster right now and active has some kind of aches and pains, and nobody's healthy to the point that you can say,
you're always beat up by the time you get to the playoffs.
The Cavs were talking about like they had a practice for the first time in I don't know how many months later in the season because of the way the schedule has been going. So Donovan Mitchell is fine. I don't want to spend too much time on whether it's the Heat or the Hawks because we still don't know, and I want to be fair to the people that are busy working during these days and won't be able to watch our beautiful show, an informative show until Friday when everybody knows who they're going to be playing. So it could be the Hawks that lost to Orlando. I was surprised about that. Or it could be on Orlando getting a little healthier. They get the prize of facing the Celtics. Yeah. Or it could be the Heat, which we all know what they can do once they get into the postseason. They're still not in it because the play-in is not considered the postseason. They don't even count as postseason numbers. I don't even know where those numbers go, but it's just they don't count. My question to you, Sam, is about Kenny Atkinson, who the moment he was signed and announced as the Cavaliers head coach, he talked about the sacrifices that some of the guys were going to have to make, and part of that was dictated by the 10-man rotation that, surprisingly to many, Kenny Atkinson stuck with even when people were hurt. So we know what the playoffs are like. We know that even when coaches use the normal 8-man, 7.5-man rotation, those shrink in the playoff. In the playoff, you cannot have the luxury to just rest people. So what's your expectation coming down when the playoffs start? Obviously, the 5 starters we're going to assume is going to be the same starting lineup that brought us to be the best team in the East for the most part. Mitchell, Garland, Strus, and Tower City, Mobley and Allen. Then you put in DeAndre Hunter and Jerome, the Cavalier duo from University of Virginia. Yeah. And after that, that's where I think the question is, and I'll pass it on to you. What do you see happening? Is it dictated by matchups? Is it dictated by who's hot, or what Kenny Atkinson needs coming off the bench?
I think, and I was just thinking that there's your top 7. You were assuming with Hunter and Jerome.
I think it's the automatic 7.
Right. That's your top 7, and then beyond that, you think about Dean Wade, Isaac Okoro, Sam Merrill. Those are probably your main 3 guys, and frankly, I think that they're all going to play. It's just how much, how long. One of the Cavs' great advantages in the postseason is going to be their depth. Is it tough to play 10 guys? Yes. Will some guys play less minutes? Yes. I suspect those last 3 that I just mentioned are probably going to have, in Merrill, Wade, and Okoro, probably going to have games where they don't play as much. One of them won't, but then the next game they may be used a lot. So, that's just part of being a professional and getting used to the idea of maybe my minutes aren't as consistent in the playoffs as they were in the regular season, but when I go in, I got to make an impact right away. And they're all of those guys are so key. I don't think Kenny Atkinson is going to veer too much because, hey, 64-18, you don't want to mess with success too much.
But I don't see him keeping Donovan on the bench.
Right. Yeah, that's
longer than
those guys are going to ramp up their minutes
because you can't give yourself the luxury of like you had in the regular season. So I see changing. I do think that in the postseason it's dictated by matchup. And I remember the championship series, the championship year where Channing Frye knew that against this team he wasn't going to play, but against Atlanta he was going to play because they. So I think that's the luxury that Kenny Atkinson has, and that's the other thing. Each team has 17, 15 guys in the roster, 13 active, but Kenny knows that he can trust at least 10 to come in at any time. So I think it's going to be dictated by whether I can see DeAndre Hunter, for example, playing a lot longer against Atlanta and the Celtics because of their length. Without knowing who's going to be the second round if the Cavs advance. If you need shots, if you need points, in the postseason, scoring comes down a little bit. Merrill, if he finds his groove, he hasn't been a liability defensively, so I think that's something that he can trust. And I think that's the biggest part, that Kenny Atkinson can look down the bench and not only have 5 guys that he can use, but 5 guys that he can trust that can come in at any time, at any point of the postseason.
Yeah, well, and guys who do the intangibles, right? And that's, you never know when Ty Jerome, DeAndre Hunter, Isaac Okoro, Sam Merrill, or Dean Wade, you never know when one of those guys is going to get hot, right? Maybe Max Strus is really hot one game, and that you're right in that sense, Raf, that, well, that's going to cut into somebody's bench minutes because you need Strus out there extending the opposing defense. You always have to worry about foul trouble too. Yeah.
And
playoffs,
that brings in Tristan Thompson into the conversation.
That could bring Tristan Thompson in there. And that's going to be. You're talking about a guy who's won a championship and does all the intangibles, and that's such a huge key because it's so often in the playoffs your stars are going to do what they're going to do. They do it all year. They do it in the playoffs. What are the role players doing? Yeah. And that's usually what are the role players doing on the road if you're able to win the series.
And when you look at the thing, we so much is talked about how the Cavs have been together for so long. But all of these guys have gone through the ups and the serious downs of being eliminated, losing in the play-in, losing in the first round, losing in the second round, and now is the time where their experience comes into play. Tristan Thompson, everybody talks about the shot, the block, the stop. Tristan Thompson had a monster Game 7. J.R. Smith had those 8 points that erased the Warriors leading Game 7, and not many people talked about because, obviously everybody remembers the ending.